"Mister, don't cry. You can borrow my mom. She's really good at making people feel better." The small voice cut through James Harrison's grief like sunlight through storm clouds. He looked up from his hands, tears still streaming down his face, and saw a 6-year-old boy standing in front of him with the most earnest expression he'd ever seen. The boy held a small toy car in one hand and had grass stains on his jeans, but his eyes carried a wisdom that didn't match his age. James, a 42-year-old CEO worth millions, sat frozen on that park bench in his expensive suit, completely undone by a child's compassion. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. Now let's see what brought James to this moment. James Harrison had everything the world said mattered: a tech empire, a corner office, wealth most people only dreamed of. But 6 months ago, he lost the only thing that actually did matter: his wife, Melissa. They'd been eating breakfast, laughing about something silly, planning their weekend. By lunch, she was gone, a brain aneurysm. No warning, no goodbye, just there one moment and gone the next. Today would have been their 15th wedding anniversary. James had tried to work through it, tried to pretend it was just another day, but by noon he couldn't breathe in that office anymore. He came to this park, the place where he'd proposed to Melissa 15 years ago, hoping to feel close to her again. Instead, he just felt empty, alone, lost. For the first time since her funeral, he let himself break down completely. He didn't care that he was in public. He didn't care that people were staring. He just couldn't hold it together anymore. They'd never had children. They'd tried for years, visited specialists, held on to hope, but it never happened. Melissa had wanted to be a mother so desperately. Now James had this empire he'd built for their future, and no one to share it with. No wife, no children. Just money and success and suffocating loneliness. The little boy standing in front of him was Oliver. 6 years old, with a heart bigger than his small body. His mother, Grace Mitchell, was a 34-year-old nurse at the Children's Hospital. She'd brought Oliver to the park after school like she did most days, catching a quick nap on a nearby bench before her night shift started. Grace was a single mother. Her husband, Oliver's father, had died in military service 3 years ago. A Marine, a hero, gone. Oliver had learned about loss early. He'd spent time in hospital environments with his mother, seen sadness, learned compassion by watching how Grace cared for hurting people. And his mother had taught him something important. Everyone needs someone when they're sad. Without hesitation or fear, Oliver sat down on the bench beside James. "My mommy says everyone needs someone when they're sad," he said simply. "Are you sad?" James, caught completely off guard by the child's directness, could only nod. His throat was too tight to speak. Oliver swung his legs, his feet not quite touching the ground. "I get sad sometimes too. About my daddy. He's in heaven." Something in James's chest cracked wider. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "I lost someone too. My wife." Oliver looked at him with those wise, empathetic eyes, and nodded like he understood completely. "Then we match," he said matter-of-factly. "You need a hug?" Before James could answer, a woman's voice called out, "Oliver!" Grace Mitchell had woken up and was rushing over, her nurse's scrubs slightly wrinkled, her long brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. "I'm so sorry, sir. He tends to adopt people." She stopped short when she saw James's face, the tears, the expensive suit, the raw vulnerability. Her expression shifted from apologetic to concerned. "Are you okay?" James felt embarrassment flood through him. "I'm fine. Your son is very kind." But Oliver wasn't letting it go. "Mommy, he's sad like we get sad. Can we help him?" Grace looked between her son and this stranger, this broken man in a $1,000 suit sitting on a park bench crying. And in that moment, she recognized something in his eyes. The same grief she saw in her mirror every morning. The same loss. The same desperate loneliness of living without the person you loved most. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe to Love is Kindness for more stories that remind us we're never truly alone. Now let's see what Grace does next. Grace stood there for a long moment, studying James. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that comes from carrying grief alone for too long. Then she made a decision. "We're about to get ice cream," she said, her voice gentle. "Would you like to join us?" James opened his mouth to refuse, to thank her politely and retreat back into his solitude. But before he could speak, Oliver grabbed his hand with small, sticky fingers. "Please? Ice cream helps sad. It really does. I promise." Something in James broke wide open. Maybe it was the child's pure earnestness. Maybe it was the desperate need to not be alone on this anniversary. Maybe it was the first human kindness he'd felt in months. He looked at Grace, then back at Oliver, and nodded. Okay. 10 minutes later, they sat in a small ice cream shop, the kind with checkered floors and handwritten flavor signs. Oliver perched between them, swinging his legs and working on a chocolate cone that was rapidly melting down his hand. He chattered away without self-consciousness, telling James about his daddy. He was a Marine, really brave. He saved people. Mommy says he's a hero. Do you know what Marines do? James listened, his heart aching with a strange mixture of pain and comfort. Oliver continued, his voice innocent but matter-of-fact. Mommy says he's watching us from heaven, like a guardian angel. Is your wife watching you? James's throat tightened. He looked across at Grace, who was watching him with understanding eyes. I hope so, he managed to whisper. Grace's expression said everything. She knew. She knew exactly what it felt like to hope the person you loved could still see you, still cared, still existed somewhere beyond the impossible finality of death. While Oliver was distracted, carefully examining the sprinkles on his cone, Grace spoke softly. 3 years ago, I got the knock on the door. 2 military officers in dress uniforms. I knew before they said a word. She paused, her voice steady but weighted with old pain. Oliver was 3. He barely understood. He asked when Daddy was coming home for months. Every night, every morning. When's Daddy coming home? James felt his chest constrict. How did you survive it? Grace looked at her son, her eyes soft with love. Honestly, I didn't have a choice. That little boy needed me to keep breathing. Some days, he's the only reason I get out of bed. She met James's eyes again. But I did get out of bed, and eventually, the days got a little easier. Not better, just easier. James's hands trembled as he set down his untouched cup of ice cream. My wife Melissa, he began, his voice breaking. Brain aneurysm. She was laughing at breakfast. We were planning to visit her parents that weekend. She was making jokes about my terrible pancakes. Gone by lunch, just gone. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. Grace's hand moved across the table, covering his. James continued, the words pouring out like a dam breaking. We never had children. She wanted them so badly. We tried for years. Specialists, treatments, hope that kept getting crushed. Now I have this empire I built for our future, and no one to share it with. His voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know how to do this, how to want to keep going, how to wake up, knowing she's never coming back. Grace squeezed his hand. 1 day at a time, she said softly. Some days, 1 hour at a time. Some days, just the next breath. There's no right way to do this, James. There's just surviving it. And then, eventually, maybe living again. Oliver, finishing the last bite of his cone, suddenly climbed off his chair and into James's lap with a complete lack of boundaries only children possess. Mr. James, you know what my mommy says? James, startled but not pushing him away, looked down at the little boy. What's that, buddy? Oliver's face was serious, his small hands resting on James's chest. She says people who leave us don't want us to be sad forever. They want us to find happy again. His innocent eyes met James's. Maybe your wife wants you to find happy too. Maybe she's not mad if you smile sometimes. That did it. James wrapped his arms around this child he'd known for less than an hour and sobbed. Deep, shaking sobs that came from a place he'd kept locked since the funeral. Oliver didn't squirm or pull away. He just stayed there, patting James's shoulder with one small hand. "It's okay to cry," he whispered. "Mommy says tears are just love, with nowhere to go." Grace didn't try to pull Oliver away. She didn't rush James or tell him to compose himself. She just moved her chair closer and sat with him, one hand on James's shoulder, letting him break in the safety of strangers who understood that sometimes the only thing that helps is someone willing to sit with you in the dark. As they walked back toward the park, the sun beginning to set, Oliver tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Can Mr. James come to dinner?" "Please, Mommy." He looked up at Grace with those pleading eyes she could never refuse. Grace looked at James, really looked at him, and saw the desperate loneliness radiating from him like a physical thing. "If he'd like to," she said simply. James felt his throat tighten again. "I don't want to impose. You've already done so much." Grace shook her head, a small smile on her tired face. "You're not. We have spaghetti and company to spare. And honestly, Oliver will talk about you all night if you don't come. You might as well be there to defend yourself." Grace's apartment was modest but warm, filled with the kind of love that money can't buy. Photos of Oliver's father lined the walls, a handsome man in military uniform, forever young, forever smiling. James helped cook while Oliver supervised from his perch on the counter, offering completely unhelpful advice and stealing pasta before it was done. There was laughter, real laughter, the kind James hadn't heard from his own mouth in 6 months. They ate dinner at a small table, Oliver telling elaborate stories about his day at school, Grace interjecting with corrections that Oliver dramatically protested. It felt normal. It felt like family. It felt like something James thought he'd lost forever. After dinner, they watched a movie, some animated film about talking animals that Oliver had seen a dozen times. Halfway through, Oliver climbed onto the couch between them and fell asleep, his head on James's arm, his feet in his mother's lap. Grace and James sat in comfortable silence for a while, the movie playing softly, this child breathing peacefully between them. Finally, James spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. For today. For not letting me sit alone on that bench. For seeing me fall apart and not walking away." Grace looked at him, her eyes soft in the dim light. "Oliver has a gift. He sees people who need help. Always has." She smiled slightly. "When he was 4, he brought home a stray cat, a homeless man's jacket, because he thought the man looked cold, and once, a very confused elderly woman from the grocery store because she seemed lonely." James laughed quietly. "He said I could borrow you." His mom. Grace's smile widened. "He's not wrong. Everyone needs someone. Even strong, successful CEOs who think they have to carry everything alone." James hesitated, the question he wanted to ask catching in his throat. Could I come back? Not as a charity case, just as a friend?" Grace met his eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a recognition. Two people who knew grief intimately, who understood that healing doesn't mean forgetting. "We'd like that," she said simply. "We'd like that very much." 6 months passed, and everything changed. James became a regular part of their lives, woven into their routine so naturally it felt like he'd always been there. He took Oliver to school sometimes, the little boy chattering about superheroes and dinosaurs, while James listened like it was the most important conversation in the world. He attended Grace's nursing school graduation, cheering louder than anyone when she walked across that stage with her hard-earned degree. James created a scholarship fund in Melissa's name, specifically for children of military families, ensuring kids like Oliver would have opportunities even after devastating loss. Grace helped him plan it, understanding exactly what those families needed because she'd been one of them. They weren't romantic, not yet, maybe not ever, but they were family. Found family, chosen family. Oliver started calling him Uncle James, and James's heart swelled every single time. 1 year after that first meeting, they returned to the park. Same bench, same spot where James had broken down. But this time, he wasn't alone. Grace and Oliver walked with him, Oliver holding both their hands, swinging between them. James knelt down and placed flowers on the bench, a small ritual, a quiet remembrance. Oliver looked at the flowers, then at James. "Is this where you met us?" James felt his eyes well up, but this time they were different tears. "This is where you saved me, buddy. This is where your incredible heart saw someone who needed help and decided to help them." Grace's hand found James's as they stood. He looked at her, this woman who'd welcomed him into her life, into her family, who'd taught him that grief doesn't have to be carried alone. "Melissa would have loved you both," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Grace squeezed his hand gently. "I think she sent us to you." Oliver ran ahead on the path, chasing a butterfly, his laughter echoing through the spring air. James and Grace walked together, not quite holding hands but close, their shoulders brushing with each step. James had started therapy, cut his work hours in half, remembered what it meant to actually live instead of just survive. Grace had found a partner in parenting and healing, someone who understood her grief without needing explanations. Oliver had a father figure, someone who showed up, who cared, who chose to be present. They weren't replacing what they'd lost. They couldn't, but they were building something new, something beautiful, something that honored those they'd loved by choosing to love again in a different way. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't holding yourself together, it's letting someone see you fall apart. And sometimes, the people who save us come in the smallest packages with the biggest hearts. What did you think of James, Grace, and Oliver's story? Rate it from 0 to 10 inches, the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe to Love is Kindness for more stories that remind us healing is possible, even after devastating loss. Thank you for watching, and remember, you never know when a small act of kindness might save someone's life.